Hello and welcome back to another episode of On the Beaten Track. I'm your host, Rihanna. Thank you so much for joining again this week. Please remember to subscribe. Follow us on socials. TikTok gets very active with some of the videos. So like this video, hype it, comment on it. I really appreciate everybody that has taken the time to subscribe and comment and like the videos. I really, really appreciate your contribution. Before we get into today's episode, I want to say thank you, Oma. My mom gives me plants that I continue to kill. And she gave me this for Mother's Day. The one she gave me last year, Mother's Day, no longer is with us. So we hope for the best for you. She said, it's very easy. She said that last year too, I must be honest. But I haven't killed it yet, Ma. Come, Oma. It's still here. It's still here. So we'll see how long this lasts. I can't have it in here where I record because the cat is generally in here. And I did read the instructions. I did. And it said not to have it near cats. So I will take it into the house when I'm done recording. But shukran, and I'll try to not kill this one. Last week we had 5 of the founding members. Today we're going to focus in on someone that we've mentioned a couple of times. And even before this, I think I've seen his name for the context of, wasn't really sure. And I just felt it was good to focus in on Strini Moodley. On the 27th of April, 2006, South Africa was 12 years into democracy. It was Freedom Day. Across the country, people were celebrating what had been won. On the same day, in Durban, a man named Strini Moodley died. He was 59 years old. He was survived by his wife, Asha, and their 4 children. The timing felt to those who knew him both cruel and somehow fitting. He had given decades of his life to the cause that Freedom Day was meant to celebrate. He had been banned, imprisoned, tortured. He had spent 6 years in Robben Island. He had been released, rebuilt his life, and continued to push as a journalist, as a playwright, as a political thinker towards the South Africa he believed was possible. He did not live long enough to see whether it would become what it had promised to be. He died on the day that the country was supposed to be remembering its promise to itself. Strini Moodley's story is, in the most literal sense, the story of blank consciousness as lived experience. He was one of the movement's founding members, not through formal student politics, not through constitutional conference, but through art. Through a play he wrote on a university campus that caught the eye of Steve Biko and changed the course of his life. The play was called Black on White. It was political satire. It poked fun with wit and anger at conditions of black life under apartheid, at the university authorities, at the whole elaborate system of indignity that South Africa had constructed and was determined to maintain. The authorities disapproved of it. They couldn't stop it. It was too popular. And when Steve Biko saw it, he went looking for its author. What followed from that meeting, Biko finding Moodley, the playwright finding the philosopher, was a friendship and a political partnership that would define both their lives. This is a story of a man who came to the movement through a stage and never left. Srinivasa Raju Moodley was born on the 29th of October 1946 in Durban. He was the eldest child of Joyce Margaret and Narain Sami Moodley. His father was a teacher who would later become director of the Durban Indian Child Welfare Association. His father was also, and this matters for understanding who Strini was, deeply involved with the South African Communist Party. Politics ran in the bloodstream of the Moodley household. Strini grew up in a home where current affairs were discussed, analyzed, and contested. His daughter, Kamara, in a 2017 profile, described her grandfather as the motivating force behind her father's political awareness, the man who nurtured and fed it from childhood. He attended Sastry College in Durban, matriculating in 1964. Then he enrolled at the University College of Indians at Salisbury Island, a segregated campus. The University College for Indians was, in the geography of South African higher education, a place of forced containment. What happened inside it was another matter. Moodley studied English and speech and drama. He was by instinct a writer, someone for whom the tools of language and performance was natural instruments for engaging with the world. And the world he was engaging with was giving him a great deal of material. Two events shaped his political awakening at this stage of his life. To remember, politics in his house, deep understanding, but he's a drama student. So let's talk about these events. The first was Sharpeville in March 1960. We all know what happened. Then the government banned the ANC and PAC. For a young man with political parents, this was not an abstract event. It was the moment the system revealed itself completely, and the moment the established vehicles of black political opposition were removed. He watched the residents of Cato Manor, a community in Durban, marching in protest against forced removals. The apartheid government was evicting people from their homes and relocating them to their designated areas, dismantling communities that have existed for generations. Watching that march, watching ordinary people assert their right to exist in the place they had built their lives, crystallized something in him. He began to write. He had friends at Salisbury Island who shared his sensibility, people who saw the university's affiliation with NUSAS, the white-dominated National Union of South African Students, as fundamentally wrong. Among them was Aubrey Mogoape, who had been South Africa's youngest political prisoner at 16 for his involvement in the Anti-Apartheid campaign. The social and intellectual environment at Salisbury Island, for those who were paying attention, was already politically charged before the BCM gave it a name. The satire he wrote black on white was performed around Natal. It drew crowds. It drew the disapproval of university authorities who could not find procedural reason to stop it because the public appetite for it was too great to suppress. What it drew most consequentially was the attention of a medical student at the University of Natal's black section who heard it, sought it, and went looking for the person who had written it. Biko and Moodley became good friends almost immediately. Their backgrounds were different. One was a medical student. The other was studying drama. One had come to politics through the university student movement. The other through art and family history. But they recognized each other. They were both in different registers, asking the same question. What kind of country could South Africa become? And what would it take to get it there? The university eventually expelled Moodley. Are we surprised? Not at this stage. The official reason was an incident at a student party, pretext by most accounts. The actual reason was the play and a newspaper interview he had given in which he had described the university college as being run like a high school. The authorities could tolerate a great deal. They could not tolerate a student using their press to call the institution what it was. He left. He found a job at a printing firm. He was fired when he answered back to a white secretary who treated him with contempt. He answered back. And this is essentially Strini Moodley in 2 words. When SASO formally launched in July 1969 at Turfloop, Moodley was not technically a student. He had been expelled. But the founding generation of the movement didn't hold that against him. He was accepted as a member without a formal position because the Constitution required positions to be held by enrolled students, but present involved contributing. His contribution was practical and essential. He threw himself into helping Biko publish the SASO newspaper, the movement's primary publication, the vehicle through which Black consciousness philosophy was being articulated and distributed across Black campuses. Biko wrote his famous Frank Talk columns there under a pseudonym. Moodley was one of the people who made the publication physically exist. He was also building something of his own. 1970, he was among the founders of the Theatre Council of Natal, which became one of the most important art and culture organizations associated with the Black consciousness movement. For Moodley, there was no separation between arts and politics. Theatre was not an escape from the struggle. It was a method of the struggle, a way of reaching people whose politics were not yet formed, a way of showing what the world looked like to someone who refused to accept its terms. He also worked briefly as a regional organizer for the Trade Union Council of South Africa. He quit in protest, as was his pattern, when he concluded that Tuksa was perpetuating its own form of racial hierarchy, failing to generally embrace colored and Indian workers alongside African ones. By 1972, at a SASO conference, he was elected publications director. He ran and managed the SASO head office at 86 Beatrice Street in Durban, coordinating publications and traveling the country by train and bus to maintain connections between the movement's branches and supporters. He was, in this period, one of the most operationally central figures in the BCM's organizational life. He had also, with Sath Cooper, been prominent in the Durban Central Branch of the Natal Indian Congress. Both he and Cooper left the NIC when their Black consciousness ideology was perceived as threatening by an older generation of Indian activists in the organization. A departure that was itself a statement of principle. The BCM's non-racialism was of a different kind from the liberal multiracialism of the older organizations, and Moodley and Cooper refused to subordinate it. In March 1973, the government moved, and everybody was banned. Strini Moodley, too, was banned under the Suppression of Communism Act and exiled to Durban. 5-year banning orders across the entire BCM leadership in a single coordinated sweep designated to decapitate the movement. He violated his banning order within a year. In 1974, he was sentenced to 7 days imprisonment, suspended for 3 years for contravening its conditions. He kept going anyway. In October 1974, when the Free Limo rallies led to the mass arrests, Moodley was among those detained. He was arrested on the 10th of October and held at Pretoria Central Prison. The Bobby Sands Trust, in a later interview, put it starkly. Moodley was, at 28, a tall and formidable figure, afraid of neither the police nor the consequences of his political activity. But he was not the real target of the arrest. They wanted the man behind Frank Talk columns. They wanted Biko. Moodley spent 2 years in remand as the trial ground towards its verdict. He was tortured to reveal Biko's identity and whereabouts. He refused to talk. His refusal cost him another 5 years on Robben Island. The trial ran until December 1976. He was convicted under the Terrorism Act and sentenced to 6 years. The sentence began. He was taken south to the island in the bay. Strini Moodley arrived on Robben Island shortly after Steve Biko had been murdered in police custody. His closest friend, the person most responsible for drawing him into the movement he had given his freedom to defend, was dead. He was entering a prison, and Nelson Mandela was on the other side of the wall. He has spoken about the approach to the island with characteristic directness. In a 1999 interview with PBS Frontline's John Carlin, he described what the 9 of them were thinking on the boat from Cape Town. He said, "We believed that even though we were going to prison, the struggle for liberation must continue. Even the prison must become a site for struggle. We thought that that would be reinforced by the presence of Nelson Mandela." They arrived. They were put in C section, the punishment section, adjacent to the B section, where Mandela and the ANC leadership was held. There were walls between them. They found ways, though, through it. Ahmed Kathrada pass sweets over at Christmas. Moodley asked Kathrada to arrange for Mandela to stand in a particular spot on a particular staircase so that the 9 BCM prisoners could get a clear view of a man they had grown up hearing about. In that PBS Frontline interview, Moodley says, "We weren't into Mick Jagger or the Beatles. We were more into Nelson Mandela, Che Guevara, people like that." But the relationship that developed when they were moved into B section and placed alongside Mandela was not one of simple hero worship. It was something more complicated, more honest, and in its way more interesting. The BCM inmates and the ANC leadership was not from the same political tradition, and they did not pretend to be. Moodley's cell was diagonally across from Mandela's. Every morning, Mandela would wake him through the window, calling him by his nickname the island had given him, Connection, and tell him the warders are coming. He described it as fast developing into a father-son relationship, and then the debates began. In that PBS Frontline interview, Strini Moodley says, "The first time it struck me that Nelson Mandela spoke a lot like my father was when he asked me why is it that we were so opposed to the homelands and the Bantustans. From that point on, I can remember our debates became more and more detailed, with him and I taking positions that were quite distant from each other. On the question of how to handle the prison warders, the two traditions were also on different pages. Mandela's approach was conciliatory, negotiated, patient. Moodley's was confrontational. When the young warder called Mandela by his first name, Moodley went straight to Mandela and told him, "This man must call you Mr. Mandela." Mandela told him not to worry about it. Moodley thought he was watching his vision of the great revolutionary being dismantled in real time. I just thought, whoa, I certainly didn't come to Robben Island to see all my dreams, my vision of a great revolutionary, shattered like this. He had been admirably honest across multiple interviews about the evolution of that perspective. He came to understand gradually what Mandela was doing. He saw the results. Within 2 years of the BCM prisoners' arrival, every prisoner had a bed and pajamas. They had brought in the Cape Provincial Library. Study was a right, not a privilege. The conciliatory approach produced things the confrontational approach could not, and vice versa. The island held both, and both were necessary. The BCM's own signature act of resistance came in 1981. Inspired directly about what they had been hearing about Bobby Sands and the Irish Republican hunger strikes in H Block, Sands died in May 1981 after 66 days on hunger strike. Moodley and 8 others launched their own hunger strike on Robben Island, demanding political status, the right to education, association, adequate clothing, and basic civil rights. The ANC prisoners, including Mandela, were alarmed. Mandela pleaded with the BCM radicals to come off the strike before they died. The hunger strikers refused. Moodley said it plainly. "We told them we won't stop until the prison authorities meet all of our demands." On the 14th day of the strike, by chance, a delegation of the International Red Cross, including their president, was on a routine visit to Robben Island. Their presence gave the strikers leverage. The prison authorities, faced with international witnesses, agreed to negotiate. The demands were met. Moodley later wrote about what Bobby Sands and the Irish hunger strikers had meant to him and his comrades, in a passage that speaks to the transnational solidarity of people who are being systematically dehumanized by state power. Strini Moodley said, "For those of us from the Black Consciousness movement, the death of the Irish hunger strikers brought us tremendous pain, but also a feeling of immense pride and admiration for people who would give their lives for liberation." He was released in December 1981. He had been on the island for 5 years. The movement he had helped build had been scattered, banned, imprisoned, exiled. The world outside was different from the one he had left, and he was going to write a play about all of it. Almost immediately after his release, Strini Moodley delivered a paper titled "The State of the Oppressed," at the Black Consciousness Movement Forum in Hammerskraal. He was not interested in quiet re-entry. He was still, and always would be, a person who used every available platform to put his analysis of the world on the record. He became a member of AZAPO, Azanian People's Organization, which had been established in 1978 to carry the BCM tradition forward after the banning of the original organizations. He served as AZAPO's publicity secretary. He remained, in other words, politically committed to the tradition he had entered through Black on White more than a decade earlier. He also returned to his first love. He wrote a play. He called it Prison Walls. Prison Walls tell the story of three prisoners and their different relationships with the prison system. The first had lost his spirit and was conforming. The second had an ambiguous, shifting relationship with the system, neither fully capitulating or fully resisting. The third actively challenged it, stood firm, refused to be broken. The play ends with the assassination of the third prisoner. The play was dedicated to three men whose influence on Moodley's life had been, in his own words, enormous: Bobby Sands, George Jackson, and Steve Biko. His daughter Kamara said he was a poet, a writer, and a playwright who scripted numerous productions depicting the lives of Black people during the apartheid era. She described him as someone who had found in drama not an alternative to politics, but its deepest expression. For his journalism, he became a freelancer at the graphic Durban Weekly and was later appointed its editor. He quit for political reasons, the pattern held, and joined a Natal Witness in Pietermaritzburg, where he became deputy news editor. He served on the National Executive Committee of the Media Workers Association of South Africa, keeping one foot always in the organized labor movement that had been part of his life since his Tuksa days in 1970. On the 11th of February 1990, Nelson Mandela walked out of the gates of prison. It was one of the most watched moments in the history of the 20th century. Strini Moodley covered it as a journalist. The man whose cell had been diagonally across from Mandela's on Robben Island, that man stood outside the gates with a press pass and watched Mandela walk free. His daughter Kamara described him as overcome with emotion. He had witnessed the courage and the character of the man called Madiba from the inside, she said. Knowing what that had cost and what it represented meant the moment almost impossible to receive without being undone by it. He was skeptical initially of some of what followed. When Mandela appeared at the 1995 World Cup final in a Springbok jersey and cap, the number 6, Pinar's number, Lee was among those who bristled. He thought Mandela was embracing whiteness at the expense of Black South Africans who still needed him. The BCM's instinct, the Black psychological liberation, had to be the foundation, not an afterthought, remained alive in him. But he came around. He concluded that Mandela was doing what Mandela had always done, building the architecture of a nation through symbolic acts that reach people who could not be reached through argument alone. Nation building. He understood it even when it sat uneasily with him. He carried his disagreements, his commitments, and his art with him into the new South Africa. He went on contributing to journalism, to theatre, to political discourse, until his health began to fail. He was 59 when he died on Freedom Day, 2006. His wife, Asha, was beside him. His 4 children survived him. The ANC issued a statement noting the timing, that he had died on Freedom Day. It was a gracious acknowledgement from an organization whose approach to the struggle had always differed from his own. The BCM community felt the loss more personally. I want to end with something that captures who Strini Moodley was, in a way that only his own words can. He was speaking to PBS about the years on Robben Island, about the difference between BCM's confrontational approach and Mandela's conciliatory one, about what it means to refuse to kowtow and what Black consciousness actually demanded of you in practice in a prison cell when a young warder called your leader by his first name and the system waited to see what you would do. He said it simply, as though it were obvious. I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. Standing on your feet meant upholding your pride as a human being and as a Black person, so that you weren't going to kowtow and be conciliatory to white races. That was just not in our book. He died on Freedom Day. He spent his life making sure that freedom would mean something when it came, that it is not the worst kind of life to have lived. Thank you so much for listening and allowing me again to bring these stories to you. The thing that strikes me about all of these members is their unwillingness and unwavering commitment to always fighting and always doing the most for their communities and always making sure that they're fighting for dignity and for their voices to be heard, and never to silence our stories into something that is inconsequential and that just goes, well, it's time to get over it. We must all fight to always remember where we come from and celebrate where we are and fight for what we want in the future. That's what I'm to keep doing. And I hope you're doing it too. Thank you so much. That's the end of this week's episode, and I'll see you next week. Bye.